Welcome back to our sequence on the engineering design cycle. At this stage of the cycle, we've gone through all the stages of the engineering design and have collected feedback from presenting the solution and informal interactions with small groups and individuals. Now that we have all this feedback, what do we do with it? That is the question. Feedback can be overwhelming, and it becomes all too tempting, especially when negative feedback comes rolling in, to begin to ignore it or find reasons to reject it. This is human nature, which makes having a plan for both documenting and sorting through all our feedback especially important. Balancing our own tendencies with more methodical means for filtering and distilling information ultimately gets us into the business of truly good redesign. At this point, we should be armed with notes and records of feedback that are now ready to venture into the debriefing phase, when the feedback has ceased and we need to decide what to do with it all. This pile of information and feedback can add up quickly, but when it is separated into what can be used and what should probably be neglected, it becomes much more manageable and useful. Some feedback is immediately useful. It is specific, it is constructive, and it is ready to act on. But often, feedback can be too general, it can be off topic, it can be too emotional or personal to justify its consideration by the team. At this stage, it's up to the design team to roughly sort feedback into 3 categories. That feedback which is useful and should be retained, that which is not yet useful and requires follow-up, and finally, that which is not yet useful and is unlikely to improve even with follow-up. Follow-up is what it sounds like, returning to individuals who provided feedback that could be more useful if more questions were answered to make the feedback specific and on point. Sometimes an individual may not be able to adjust that feedback to be more useful to the team, but many times one-on-one follow-up can expose miscommunication or misinterpretation, lead to a more specific and less personal assessment of the design, or otherwise expand or clarify on feedback in a way that is beneficial to future interactions between team and outside others. While following up with the individuals outside the team is important while processing feedback, it is also important to follow up within the design team. Sometimes negative critique and feedback can be a wake-up call to some members of the team, or even the entire team. Used carefully, this critique can be turned back onto the team as a challenge for some or all to become more professional, to strengthen weaknesses, to be more accountable, to contribute more, and so on. Spending some time considering what the feedback means to the design team can be as important as considering what it means to the design. Once the team has had a chance to fully explore and review feedback, both by following up outside the team as well as by turning a mirror of self-evaluation onto itself, it is time to distill everything down to what will be practical, realistic, specific, clear, and actionable, so that it can be used in considerations of redesign. Some of this subset of feedback will lead to actual improvements to the design. Some will lead to changes as to how the team communicates the design. The good news is that rarely is a design team tasked with considering and addressing all feedback received, but making good choices about which feedback to consider and which to discard is as critical as the design itself in moving forward to what is hopefully to become a successful product over the long haul. While it might be tempting to jump into redesign and move on as quickly as possible, whether under time pressure or simply a desire to move forward, it is important first to sketch out what a redesign might look like, with attention to how critical feedback has been incorporated into the preliminary design, And then before going any farther, we'll bring it back to those whose feedback we are trying to address, who seem resistant, who have a particularly strong say in the design or in our livelihood, or who had valid and major concerns about the design. Another round of feedback on the redesign, when it is at a preliminary stage, will go a long way toward developing a revised design that can march toward successful development of a product. In this session, we have looked at the process of formally considering and digesting feedback collected throughout the engineering design cycle. Using the most important of feedback, we can now face the critical decisions to redesign or not, to iterate or not. And whatever we decide, we are ready to take it back to those who provided feedback to ensure that we are on the same page with our most important critics. Thank you for joining us. We certainly hope that this session has stimulated you to use new strategies to sort feedback on your own work into a set of logical, practical, and sane options for crafting revisions to your design and moving forward. We hope that you'll join us again as we examine other phases of the engineering design cycle, also in more detail.